The explanatory synthesis is a written discussion that draws on two or more sources in order to explain the how or why of a topic, and it depends on your ability to infer relationships between your sources. The explanatory synthesis includes summary and critique as its basis. You have to be able to summarize what you've read and then also evaluate it. Before you use a source, you must understand what the source says. You must be able to summarize those sources, and then you have to go beyond that summary and make judgments based on your critical reading. You need to determine the validity of the sources, whether you agree or disagree with the writer, and why you agree or disagree with the writer. Moving beyond summary and critique. Because a synthesis is based on two or more sources, you will need to be selective in choosing information from each source. You're never going to include everything written in an article when you are synthesizing and putting things together. You need to be able to write a one-paragraph summary of each source. If you cannot summarize what you read in one paragraph, then you need to go back and reread it because you were probably distracted while you were reading. Then you need to look at your annotation. And just as a reminder, the annotation is the highlighting, the underlining, the notes in the margin of whatever it is that you're trying to evaluate. You want to look at the summary and at those annotations and look for relationships or connections between the material in your sources. Sometimes certain ideas will float to the top, making it easier for you to come up with some kind of a statement about it. And you have to determine whether they are worth synthesizing. When you do research, sometimes an instructor will say that you need to include 5 sources. So you go to your library, you find 5 sources. But maybe not all those sources are really helpful in adding them to your paper. So you're going to have to judge them. And sometimes you're going to have to go and look for additional sources. You want to think about the difference between an editorial, a news article written on the same subject. An editorial is certainly an opinion. A news article we tend to believe is more factual. The main difference in those two types of writing is the vocabulary. So you want to look at the verbs. Verbs that are very highly emotionally charged tend to be persuasive. Things that say should or should not, those are persuasive. So how do you start a synthesis? Well, at first you need to write a one-paragraph summary of each of your articles or sources. Then you can make either a chart or a Venn diagram, some type of visual diagram that helps you organize things that are alike and things that are different. This could be a simple list. This could be the beginnings of an outline. So when you're doing that, what basic idea floats to the top? Is there one particular thing that you're reading in 3, 4, 5 sources that is repeated in all of those sources? If that is so, then that's going to give you a great basis on which to conduct your research. Also, when you read something, the how you feel when you are reading it and what emotions you have are what you need to pull from when you are writing. You cannot write something that you are not passionate about. And that's very difficult for students because quite often you get topics that are not something you really have an opinion about one way or the other. But you've got to look deeper. You've got to find something in that writing that does get you emotional, because that emotion is where the quality writing comes from. When you're looking at these various texts, are the writers in agreement? Do they disagree? Do they complement each other? How do you feel about the ideas of other scholars or writers? Have you read something that totally contradicts what those writers have said? And what do you think about that? Now it's time to write your thesis statement. Define the point you want to make about the stories. This is the idea that floats to the top. This is the thing that you just can't seem to let go of when you're writing. Remember, this is an explanatory synthesis, so your thesis needs to reflect your limited subject and opinion about the how or why of your idea. It's not trying to convince someone what your idea is or that your idea is better. It's trying to explain it. So for example, in the 20th century, people frowned on introducing children to violence, so movie makers like Walt Disney sanitized well-known fairy tales like Cinderella. So this asks the question, why? I don't know why parents routinely subject their children to violence. So it's at the first part of this thesis statement, says that there was a change in the 20th century where people didn't want their children to see violence. So that's why Disney changed some of the more gruesome details of Cinderella. How was this done? The Brothers Grimm's violence had been softened. So Disney took a few versions of Cinderella, presumably, and took out the parts that would be more offensive to parents. And the Brothers Grimm version is probably the most violent of the Cinderella version. Here's another one. Disney's Cinderella leaves out all the gory details of the Grimm brothers' Cinderella in order to soften for children the harshness of the world's oldest genre. Why? I don't know why parents routinely subject their children to violence. How? For example, birds plucking out the eyes is replaced with reversed servitude. So that tells you how Disney changed, how it made Grimm's Brothers' tale softer. Your purpose will direct your essay. For our class, your purpose is to clearly explain through synthesis, using two or more versions of a fairy tale and other scholarly discussion, the how or why of an idea that you have come to understand by reading the tale. Your purpose will direct your essay. Offer judgment, creating critical ideas about those sources. So for our class, your purpose is to clearly explain through synthesis, using three versions of a fairy tale and other scholarly discussion, the how or why of an idea that you have come to understand by reading the tale. Then you need to put them all together. Determine the relationship between your sources. Decide what authors or versions support your opinion and use them. Decide which scenes, which quotes, in other words, what evidence will support your thesis. Then draw your conclusions. Who says the same things? What scenes are different from each other?